Thanks for always being with us, Potterheads. Here we are with a new chapter of Backward with Purpose, Part 1, Always and Always, by Dead Woodpecker. We are at Chapter 41, Interlude, Neville Longbottom.
Chapter 41, Flight. Chapter text. The days ease by. Harry spent the time skiving off his classes more than he ought to either spend time with Ginny in the room of requirement, or to spend time in the library with Hermione while she searched through every single book to find a miracle. This had led to arguments and snappish retorts. "I wish you would tell Dumbledore," Hermione said pointedly one day in early February. "He could be of so much help." "No," Harry said implacably. There was no way that he was going to tell Dumbledore that he was too much of a coward to face his own death without a safety net. Merlin. How had he ever wanted to know everything about his destiny? Why hadn't he realized that Dumbledore had genuinely been protecting him? And if Harry had known too soon, he would have felt much the way he did now. How could he possibly have resented Dumbledore? Sometimes he even wanted to have his memory wiped, and only be told moments before. Hermione glared at him, but after a few moments, the look in her eyes softened. Harry looked away, jogging his leg and wishing that Ginny was out of charms already so they could spend the next several hours in blissful oblivion. "Have you tried the tales of Beedle the Bard?" "Yes, Harry," Hermione said. "Several times. I've looked through other books of fairy tales. There was one legend about a Russian stone, but it only heals from the brink of death, not from death itself." "Nothing foreign," Harry said. "We don't have the time. We're running out of it as it is." Hermione's lips twisted. Harry appreciated the effort it took her not to fling her arms around him again. Not that he minded it when she hugged him, but her desperation reminded him of things. They never spoke of it. As the days had passed and January had stormed into February, the clock had been ticking. News from the Ministry, courtesy of Mr. Weasley, Kingsley, and Dora, had been coming steadily. Voldemort had bewitched more and more members of the Ministry. Soon it would fall. Harry was increasingly impatient with this fruitless search. He did not want to die, but he knew that he had to. It seemed like such a waste of time, though. He looked over at Hermione and wondered if this was her way of saying goodbye. He wouldn't put it by her. She was clever and rational enough to know that this was a fool's hope. His suspicions grew when he realized that her eyes weren't moving across the page. Rather, she was blinking away tears. He opened his mouth, though he had no idea what to say, but what interrupted by the appearance of Kingsley's Lynx Patronus in the air above the table. "The Ministry has fallen." Harry was already on his feet, and his heart already raced with adrenaline. He pulled the Marauder's map out of the pocket of his robes and thanked Dumbledore's foresight in forcing all the fourth-year students and below to remain in their own common rooms after dinner. This decision had been vastly unpopular, but it made getting the Muggle-born students to safety vastly easier. He also thanked Sirius' long-nurtured skills at finding ways to break the rules. Without the charm that turned the names of the Muggle-borns blue, it would be far more difficult. "Get the Ravenclaws," Harry said. "I know," Hermione said. She sprinted off down the corridor. Harry wasted no time, but lifted the modified copy of the Marauder's map up to the light and searched out the first bright blue he found. It turned out to be Justin Finch-Fletchley. "It's time," Harry said grimly. "Can you start looking for members of your house? Get them to the room of requirement as quickly as possible." Justin paled and looked mildly ill, but he nodded. "I've got my map on me. I'll look for all the Hufflepuffs." Harry raced down the corridor. He found 3 sixth-year Ravenclaws together. "Listen," he said. Their eyes were wide. He did not even have to fight the urge to grimace. Whatever awe they felt of him could only help in this moment. "All 3 of you need to get to the 7th-floor corridor." "Why?" one of the girls asked. She looked confused. Harry thought her name might be Susanna Upton, but he couldn't be sure. "Because Voldemort has taken over the Ministry," Harry said. "And you're Muggle-born. You know what that means, yes? Hogwarts isn't safe for you." Susanna swayed a little on her feet, and her friends gasped. "Exactly," Harry said. "Look, I haven't got time to explain now. Just get to the corridor, will you?" Harry was satisfied when they left at a near run. They were in Ravenclaw, which meant that they weren't stupid. They knew exactly what it meant. If the Ministry had fallen, the school would fall soon enough. Voldemort would be wary of Dumbledore, which was why Dumbledore was going to die tonight at the hands of Severus Snape. He hoped that somehow he would be able to see Voldemort's face when he realized how many people who were supposed to be dead were actually very much alive. He imagined it would shock him. Those scarlet eyes would widen with surprise and, Harry hoped, fear. He briefly imagined Voldemort soiling his robes when he caught sight of Dumbledore, alive and wielding the Elder Wand. But that seemed like too much to hope for. "Harry," Sirius hissed, "did you get hit with a curse?" His godfather's voice startled him out of his fantasy, and Harry shook himself. No," he said guiltily. "I was just imagining Voldemort pissing himself." Sirius snorted. "That explains the vague smile. We've got more important things to do, Harry. Save it for later." "Right," Harry nodded, and with that, he and Sirius went sprinting in opposite directions. Evacuating the Muggle-born students out of Hogwarts was both easier and more difficult than Harry had imagined all at the same time. He kept an eye on the map. Every once in a while, a horrible chill would pass over him as he contemplated attempting to do this without it, and saw with great relief that a great many blue dots streamed up the 7th-floor corridor and disappeared. Less than 1 hour had passed, and only 3 Muggle-borns were left. Harry was sweating, and not just because he'd been running the length of Hogwarts with his heart nearly beating out his chest. The Porkeys would take the students away to safety, and Harry had to deliver them on time. Besides, Ministry officials would be here at any moment to arrest Dumbledore, Harry, Ginny, Ron, Hermione, and any Muggleborn they would find. That won't happen, he thought to himself grimly. And as he sprinted through the corridors, past the curious paintings, and through the hidden passageways and downstairs, the thought that he was doing his best to save the innocent pushed him. When his legs grew tired and his lungs threatened to escape from his chest, he remembered the sharp, sick pain when he had realized that Voldemort had unleashed fiendfire on the sleeping students. It was his strength. "Potter," Professor McGonagall said sharply. "One more," he panted. "Outside got to." "I'll go," she said urgently. Her face was pale, and her lips were compressed in a very thin line. "They're at our gates. You mustn't be seen." He opened his mouth to argue, but she cut him off. "I'm still a professor," she said, drawing herself up to her full height. "They won't arrest me immediately." He glanced down at the map. He wondered, vaguely, how angry Ginny would be if she found out that she had put her name in a different color from the rest, so he could spot her easily. He did not see her. He searched it intently, looking for Ron and Hermione. He did not see their dots either. For a moment, he was grateful that he was not witness to what surely must be pandemonium and confusion in the room of requirement. He hoped the students were cooperating. He hoped they had the sense to realize the amount of danger they were in. In his mind's eye, he saw a long stream of wary, watchful students traversing the distance between the room of requirement and the Hog's Head Inn. He hoped this was the case. He folded the map with slightly sweaty fingers, tucked it back in his robes, ducked behind a suit of armor, and cast a disillusionment charm on himself. And then he waited. Suddenly, without warning, a voice boomed in his ears, and once he heard the message for the first time, his entire body went numb with relief. "By the authority of the Ministry of Magic," someone said with an air of great pomposity and gravity, "every student, professor, and everyone else on the premises are to convene in the Great Hall. Noncompliance will be met with due punishment under law. I repeat, by the authority of the Ministry of Magic, every student, professor, and everyone else on the premises are to convene in the Great Hall. Noncompliance will be met with due punishment under law." Harry wondered what sort of punishment would be suitable for refusing to go to the Great Hall. Life sentence in Azkaban? Death? The murder of one's family? He gave his head a sharp shake, as though clearing it of cobwebs, and made his way inside the hall. He kept to the back, in the shadows, and watched as dumbfounded students began trickling in. Harry was still hidden by his charm when the Ministry officials, though he supposed he ought to think of them as Death Eaters, as they were pretty much one and the same, entered the Great Hall. There was dead silence. Dumbledore sat in his chair, appearing to be perfectly relaxed, but he was the only one. Harry's body hummed with adrenaline, but but he did not fret that everything would explode in their faces. He could not allow himself to worry. The students at the Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Gryffindor tables were pale, frightened, and beginning to understand why they had been called here. There were empty seats, and confusion and the stirrings of horror made the tension in the room almost palpable. Even the Slytherins were subdued, though the children of Death Eaters seemed terrified and jubilant all at the same time. He eyed Daphne Greengrass. She sat between her sisters, Astoria and Ophelia. Her face was pale, gaunt even, and Harry could tell that her fingers shook from nerves. He did not know if this was from the fact that the darkest wizard in recorded history had just taken over the country, and the only person who could stop him was a sixth year she called Harvey, or it could be that she was anxious about being a distraction. If things went to hell, she'd be in as much danger as Snape. He glanced again at Astoria and Ophelia. More danger, he thought. Voldemort will go after her family. Loud voices in the entrance hall alerted Harry that he needed to make his way to the platform upon which sat the professors. He strode between the house tables, focusing on the pale, silent students rather than those who smirked. It wouldn't do for him to curse one of them at this critical juncture. He walked on silent feet. Only Neville turned his head slightly as Harry walked by. The rest were wondering when it was that the world had changed and did not look up at an inexplicable breeze. Dumbledore stood, and Harry paused. The older wizard looked grim. Harry felt an answering swirl of emotions. Deep, abiding fear and worry that had nothing to do with what would actually happen today, and everything to do with how this would play out to its inevitable conclusion. Harry did not want to contemplate losing anyone else. Strangely, he also felt a sort of satisfaction that Voldemort, who had seemed nearly unstoppable last time, had played into their hands. I believe that this unceremonious intrusion at our school means that we must assume that Voldemort has seized control, Dumbledore said. His voice was strong. The Ministry workers who have. He was interrupted by the doors slamming open with such force that they bounced off the walls. Harry thought inexplicably of Professor Quirrell. He had opened those doors in the exact manner. Harry almost expected to hear the warning of a troll in the dungeons. But Quirrell was long dead, twice, and the danger to Hogwarts was not in the dungeons, but entering the Great Hall. There was no troll, only a werewolf, 2 Death Eaters, and 7 genuine Ministry officials. Harry's blood ran cold at the look of delight on Fenrir Greyback's face. He eyed the younger girls lasciviously, resting upon a first-year Ravenclaw the longest. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, a Ministry official, said loudly, "You are hereby arrested." "Charges?" Dumbledore interrupted pleasantly. The official faltered, as if surprised that Dumbledore had thought to ask. An ugly, furtive look crossed his face, and Harry clenched his wand. "Sedition," he said. "Treason against the Ministry." In the next moment, there was a rumbling sound. Harry automatically looked up at the ceiling, as though he would find the evidence of an approaching storm on the enchanted ceiling. The echo of thunder continued, and in the few seconds it lasted, all 10 of the arriving supporters of Voldemort had been halted, as if they had been glued to the floor. "Treason," Dumbledore said softly, though his voice carried. Everyone in the room heard it. "What a funny way to describe what I've been doing." "The Ministry," he said loudly, "exists to protect, defend, and serve the wizarding population of our nation. What you see today, children, is the result of a government that had become so used to having power that its original function is only a memory." Harry continued forward. Dumbledore had still not taken a sip of his drink. Harry could not blame him. This would be Dumbledore's last chance to address the students before it was over. "Do not blame this on Voldemort," Dumbledore said harshly. Had the Ministry of Magic been strong, united, and unwilling to let crimes go unpunished, Voldemort would never have had a chance. Blame weak leaders like Cornelius Fudge, who were blinded by power so much that they never saw the responsibility that comes with it. Blame witches and wizards like Dolores Umbridge, who twisted the function of the Ministry and made a mockery of justice. It seemed as though no one breathed. Harry watched with grim satisfaction the struggles of the 10 who had been chosen to kill Dumbledore. 10 of them, and they'd still not had a chance. He beamed at Dumbledore, though he knew that he was still invisible. He walked around the high table. Professor Flitwick turned his head as he passed, though he said not a word. "This is where we part ways," said Dumbledore. He reached down to the goblet before him. "One last toast, if you will." He lifted the goblet high in the air. Harry had to admire his flair for the dramatic. "A toast to friendship, camaraderie, and love, all of which we have found together in this gracious building." He sipped, long and deep, and Harry's inside squirmed. "In the dark, and, I assure you, they will be very dark indeed, days before us. This is what we must cling to: brightness and light, friendship and love." Dumbledore pitched forward onto the table, convulsing, and slid over the table and onto the floor before it. Harry did not know if he did that on purpose. He must have done. It was too perfectly placed to be entirely natural. Professor Sinistra gasped and made to help. "Do not touch him," Snape said slowly, carefully. His wand was raised and pointed directly at Professor Sinistra. His face was utterly implacable, and Professor Sinistra sat back and stared down at her fingers. There was perhaps 10 seconds of ringing silence, and Harry heard several girls, or boys, he supposed, begin to sob. Dumbledore made a few animalistic grunts and fell still. Too still. Snape gave a casual flick of his wand, and the silencing charm and sticking charm were lifted from the invading force from the Ministry. Greyback strode forward, prodded the body, and tilted his head back in a wild howl of celebration. Harry had to restrain himself from opening up the werewolf's chest with the cutting curse. "Dumbledore," Snape said delicately, "has deserted the school. It seems a new headmaster must be chosen." "It'll be you, Severus," Greyback said easily. He glanced around at the teachers, all of whom were now under the threat of wands. "He's got my vote," Sirius said. He leaned back in his chair. A lock of hair was in his face, and he suddenly looked quite young to Harry. Another actor, he was playing his part almost as well as Dumbledore had. His hand trembled, as though he were too afraid to say something snide. "Professor Snape will make an excellent headmaster. Your flattery will get you nowhere," Snape said coldly. "Your teaching position, defense against the dark arts, is now obsolete." "That's not a problem," Sirius said. "I could teach the dark arts, too. I'm a wizard of many talents." "We'll see," Snape said. Harry looked around the room. Draco was dead. Lucius was dead. Narcissa had apparently gone insane and had not been seen outside Malfoy Manor in months. No one here knew that Sirius would never condone the dark arts. He looked up at Snape and Sirius. If any two men could protect the students without the world knowing the truth, it would be them. Harry wondered if whoever wrote that damned article so many years ago had known that it would eventually make his life easier. All this caution makes it much easier to move in the shadows. Greyback stepped away from Dumbledore's body, and Harry walked over. He leaned over so that any movement he made would be hidden by Dumbledore himself. He levitated Dumbledore's body an inch off the ground. He placed a small, muggle toy with the likeness of a man with a fake, plastic smile underneath. He sat back on his heels and pointed his wand at the second closest torch on the wall. With a whispered incantation, he made it flicker and die. "I welcome the presence of the Dark Lord's servants at our school." Daphne stood up. She spoke very loudly, and her voice hardly wavered at all. "You traitorous bitch!" Ernie Macmillan yelled, right on cue. He stood up abruptly. "You simpleton!" Daphne retorted. Bright spots of red bloomed in her cheeks. "It's over. The Dark Lord has won, as we knew he must." She turned to Snape. "I swear allegiance," she said. "Duly noted, Miss Greengrass," Snape said smoothly. He left the head table. "There will be no tricks, no fighting, no disobedience. The rest of you would do well to follow suit. Don't notice the missing Muggleborns. Don't notice the missing Muggleborns. Don't notice the missing Muggleborns," Harry chanted to himself. All eyes were now on Snape. Harry waved his wand, and the furthest torch died. He counted to 6 and cast the disillusionment charm on Dumbledore. Sirius did his part, and the Muggle doll was transfigured into the body of Dumbledore at the exact same moment. Harry's heart pounded in his chest, and his hand shook a little as he levitated the body further. Walking the length of the Great Hall while invisible had been simple, and Harry had thought nothing of it. Walking the length of the Great Hall while invisible and with Dumbledore's body with him was frightening. One wrong move, and it would all fall apart. Snape's cover would be blown. He cleared the Hufflepuff table. Sweat poured down his face. If someone unexpectedly hits me, he forced himself to keep going at a quick pace. He had only a moment before they realized that he was not there, and that the Muggleborns were missing as well. He was nearly running. He could hear Snape speaking. He supposed he was saying more of the same drivel. "Thank you, Snape," he thought. "Keep talking for as long as you can. Just keep talking." None of the Ministry officials or Death Eaters would want to offend Snape, who was the closest thing Voldemort had to a best mate. Keep talking. The moment Harry and Dumbledore made it through the doors, he broke into a trot. He ran across the entrance hall and out into the courtyard. The cold wind hit him like a fist. He ran over to where he had stashed his firebolt, whispered the spell that would make Dumbledore's body easy to transport, climbed on, and flew into the air. He felt a great sense of relief as he pointed his broomstick toward the gates and raced toward them. He passed over them and, without the slightest hesitation, twisted in midair and disapparated. "Welcome to the home for dead people," Fred said loudly, once Dumbledore had recovered enough to leave one of the guest rooms at Grimmauld Place. George snickered. Neville, who had arrived just 10 minutes prior, saluted. "Aren't you two supposed to be helping get the Muggleborns to safety?" Percy asked. He leaned up against the door with his arms folded. Ollivander, who had taken a break from making wands in Sirius Mother's old room, laughed. "We got them all settled," George said. He rested his head on the arm of the sofa. Despite his light tone, he looked tired. "Once all the Portkeys brought them. We had to explain everything about 3,000 times." Fred rolled his eyes. "I'm sure you did," Dumbledore murmured. "Are you all right, Albus?" Harry asked. He was feeling pleasantly relaxed. He'd just received a Patronus from Ginny. She would be home in 5 minutes. She was just finishing last-minute details. Now that the ordeal in the Great Hall was over, Harry knew that his job had actually been easier than explaining the new facts of life to Muggleborns and their Muggle families. He did not envy Ginny, Ron, and Hermione their tasks. "You were under Polyjuice, right?" Harry said suddenly. "And the rest of you? If any of them decide to leave." "Of course we were under the potion," Fred said. "Yeah, Mummy," said George. "You know we always use Polyjuice." Harry sighed with relief. "It's just for the best. Better not to let anyone know." "Hi there, honey," Ginny said brightly. Harry turned his head so fast that his neck popped. "Have a nice day at work?" "Work was a little boring today," he said, grinning. "Slow. Not much happened. The Ministry was taken over by you-know-who," Fred said. "Dumbledore died," George continued. He nodded at Dumbledore, who gave a cheery little wave. "We sent all the Muggleborns off to the Muggleborn Preserves," Fred said. "Just another day," George finished, nodding sharply. "Boys," Molly Weasley said tiredly. She was rather thinner and paler than she had been over Christmas, Harry noted. He felt a deep sense of appreciation for her. This, having a workable plan for what to do when Voldemort took over, had made all the difference. He remembered the months of uncertainty, loss of hope, desperation that had made up these same months last time, and he was glad that things were so much different now. Dumbledore was clearly thinking along these same lines. "To the woman of the hour," he said. "I would offer a toast, but the last one killed me." Harry laughed. Snape had mixed a, relatively, harmless potion, the draught of living death, and a mild convulsing draught. It had been enough for everyone in the room. However, Dumbledore was officially dead, and Snape was the one who had killed him. Funny how things like this happen again, except so differently. Mrs. Weasley flushed a deep red, making her entire head look like a fiery sunset. He grinned at her, more than willing to honor her achievement. Creating the Muggle-born sanctuaries across Britain, and indeed France, as the Delacour family had offered to help, had been her idea. Arranging the Portkeys and placing them on individuals without their knowledge had largely been her job. And uniting the Muggle-born students with their Muggle families had been her idea her plan, and had stemmed from her tender heart. "Brilliant, Mrs. Weasley," he said. Several of the Weasleys looked around at him in surprise. He ignored them, though he felt himself blushing. "Excellent, really excellent." "Thanks, Harry dear," she said. Harry felt an odd little hitch in the vicinity of his chest at the words Harry dear. How many times had he heard those words with that same inflection? He gave his head a sharp shake. "Harry," Neville said. He was staring at Harry with an unfathomable look on his face. "Can I talk to you for a moment? Before we start a Potter Watch? Only because I've got to head back to Hogwarts right after." "Sure," Harry said. He stood up, smoothed his robes, and followed Neville out the door and into the hall. Neville glanced back at the open doorway, out of which spilled light and voices made loud with relief. Then he led them down the stairs and into the basement kitchen. It was very quiet, and Harry was just starting to feel a hint of foreboding. I've seen you around them," Neville said. He sounded deeply uncomfortable. "And you know, Ron and Ginny." Harry grew more confused by the second. "What?" he said blankly. "The Weasleys," Neville said in a quiet voice. Harry blinked. He hadn't been sure what to expect, but this was not it. "The Weasleys? Do you remember when we went to prune the flaming roses?" Neville asked. He did not wait for Harry to reply, but continued on after setting his jaw. You really set me straight, you know. I was insecure. I didn't feel, like I was actually an asset. No, don't give me that look. I don't need to be told why I'm in Gryffindor." "Then what does he want?" As if reading his thoughts, Neville took a deep breath and said, "I think you're being a bit brainless about the Weasleys, mate." Harry briefly ran through his last encounters with the Weasleys. He hadn't been rude. He'd listened to them. He'd laughed at Fred and George's jokes, and even though Mr. Weasley, Bill, and Charlie were uncomfortable around him, he made an effort to include them in discussions. "What did I do?" "See?" Neville said a bit forcefully. "You don't even know what I'm saying." "No, I don't," Harry said honestly. "You're perfectly nice to them. Now, at least, but you hold them at a distance," Neville said. "I wouldn't even call it arm's length. More like you keep a chasm," Harry said. He abruptly remembered his dream. He was on one side of the chasm, and the Weasleys were on the other, and in between, like a bridge, was the rune that meant love. He'd thought it had been pain at the time, but now that he knew it was love, he did not like the fact that he was still afraid of it. "Yeah," Neville said, bouncing a little on the balls of his feet. "Why is that?" Harry didn't answer for a long time. A part, though small, was that the more the Weasleys loved him, the more it would hurt them when he died. But that instinctive protectiveness was only 1/10 of the reason why. He was afraid of several things, one of which was the fact that the Weasleys couldn't possibly ever love him the way they once had. Too much had happened. The other, he did not need any other reasons for his legs to feel like lead when he went out to meet his death. But he could not really explain this to Neville. Neville did not know about the Horcrux inside of Harry, and Harry did not want to open that discussion in this moment. So he offered the only reason he had that was not tied to his impending death. "It won't ever be the same, Neville. We won't ever have that same kind of rapport." "Bullshit," Neville said succinctly. "Yeah, maybe it wouldn't be the same. Not even close." "Bullshit," Neville said again. "Think about Sirius. You knew him in your first timeline for what? 2 years? Are you telling me that you weren't close? That you didn't love him?" "No," Harry said. He tugged at his collar. "But it wasn't the same, Neville. We didn't have the same kind of history. You thought he was trying to kill you for an entire year." Neville said, "You told me. For an entire year, you thought that he'd betrayed your parents to Voldemort and was now coming after you. But once you realized that he hadn't," Harry furrowed his brow. The comparison made no sense. "The Weasleys figured out a year ago that you aren't some sort of monster," Neville said firmly. "You're like Sirius, and they're like you. There's no reason that you couldn't have a close relationship again. And don't tell me that too much time has passed," Neville said heatedly. "If my parents came back to their right minds today, I wouldn't give a shit that they didn't raise me or didn't know me until now." "Neville, the only thing standing in your way is you." "Harry," said Neville. "Merlin Sagaballs, Harry, you traveled back in time for these people, and now you can't forgive them?" You draw the line at something that should be ridiculously easier than using the tears of Merlin? Yeah, they fucked up big time, but he interrupted himself and ran his hands through his hair. I'll try, Harry said abruptly. He wanted to leave this kitchen. He wanted to get back to the big crowd that would enable him to turn off Neville's words. They were running through his head, but they kept coming up to this gigantic barrier, and Harry did not want that barrier breached. Listen, I'll try. We gotta go, though. We gotta get back to the room. We've gotta do Potter Watch. All right, Neville nodded. He did not meet Harry's eyes, and Harry had the impression that he was vastly uncomfortable with the amount of emotion that he had displayed. The thought made his stomach churn, and he forced himself to think of something else. The last thing he wanted to do was dwell on Neville's words.